So, we at the UK weren't content to just inherit Commie Fournier's awful politics. Turns out we've inherited another thing that's unique to America's worst state, and that is incessant water shortages. It's raining already, much in the south of England, despite that heat wave being quite short-lived.
It does seem funny to be talking about water shortages when it's been pouring with rain since yesterday.
Yeah, we are notorious for having Britain always talking about the weather, but everyone was scaremongering, and I remember you did a segment quite a while ago talking about the imminent heat death of the UK and the climate catastrophizers. Well, this has been applied here, but it's actually quite strange that there's something more nefarious going on with our water shortage, because it seems to be foreign-owned businesses and also mass migration interests that are conspiring to undermine the UK's resource security. Speaking of foreign interests, if you'd like to subscribe to lotuseast.com, you can go over and watch Thomas's video on the march of neoliberalism for all our institutions. And yes, it did germinate in Thatcher. She solved the 1976 issues and the winter of discontent in 79, many of which we seem to be repeating here with endless strikes, plagues of, well, flying ants rather than ladybirds this time, and heat waves, which have been rather uncomfortable. They haven't been as endless as they were in 76.
Nice, actually. I'm used to rain most of the summer.
I've seen your shirt after you sat in that chair. It looks like a Rorschach test. I wouldn't say it's nice to be sharing an office with you. But funnily enough, neoliberalism has caused these kinds of disasters to happen again. So go and look at exactly what Thomas's gripes were with that. So in the UK, we're facing down hosepipe bans. Despite the heatwave seeming to be waning, these seem to be staying in place for a little while because it's England's driest July since 1911. That's rolled into the start of August. Thames Water, which is where I am, and what you're on as well, has said it plans to announce a hosepipe ban because of the hot, dry summer, if the hot, dry summer continues. The company supplies 15 million customers across London and the Thames Valley with water, and it became the latest company to signal it will bring in a hosepipe ban in the face of the summer weather. The water company said, given the long-term forecast of dry weather and another forecast of very hot temperatures coming in the coming weeks, we're planning to announce a temporary use ban in the coming weeks. They repeated themselves twice, so that wasn't me. South East Water and Southern Water have already announced a hosepipe ban after the driest first half of the year since 1976 saw South East England clocking up 144 bans after the clocking up 144 days with little or no rain so far in 2022. It comes as 10 fire engines and about 70 firefighters have been called to grass fires between junction 26 and 25 on the M25, which is the large motorway around London.
And we've not found any magnifying glasses strapped to poles in any
fireworks
of
or cigarettes or the exact kind of things that burn down Notre Dame.
People with black masks haven't been seen doing this.
No, exactly. But don't worry, Josh. It's climate change that is causing heat waves and more of these dry situations. Even though we've had spotty conditions over the last couple of years. Remember the snowfall in late March? Oh, wait, hang on a minute. It's not global warming anymore. It's just climate change. It's the catch-all. Said that record temperatures are made 10 times more likely because of global warming and virtually impossible without it, research shows. The 97% consensus rears its ugly head again. We actually have some footage here recorded by, of all people, my dad, who was driving past on the M25. If we can play this. So, for our audio listeners, the flames are rather high. They're over the trees, and they're not very nice. I edited out his commentary because, of course, it was just two working men just speculating at it. I don't want to out him. Thanks, Dad. But did it seem as bad as Australia or California to you?
It seemed relatively contained. There were a few cases of property destructions of properties that are on the edge of more rural areas, but I've always struggled to see where the people are coming from. I feel like it's normally city dwellers that have this perspective that having rural fires is somehow some sort of disaster. Like, it's in many parts of the country, it's a key part of the ecosystem that it helps new growth and get rid of dominant vegetation. It's actually a good part of the cycle. And also the fact that a hosepipe ban has only just been brought in August, towards the end of the summer, kind of suggests that it's not really as bad, because I remember hosepipe bans as long as I've been on this earth, so it can't be that bad.
Well, I'm glad you've actually mentioned the sort of city dwellers making the issue worse, because one thing that I did during my time in environmental policy was do the government's national tree strategy consultation, and I wasn't telling them, how many trees you should plant, etc., because the answer is always more from all these kinds of people. But I did point out, we recently had, during lockdown, Australia and California catch light. Why was that? Well, it wasn't because of climate change. It was because of climate policy. They'd massively densely packed the forests. They'd stopped dieback burning, as you said. It's crucial to the revivification of vegetation. And so that meant that a bunch of dry dead wood had built up, and especially in California as well, they'd imported a lot of the Australian trees. That's all eucalyptus. So the hydrocarbon-dense, flammable, oil thick trees. So by increasing forest density and cutting back on forest fire prevention, you're making your entire landscape a tinderbox. And lo and behold, no new forest fire prevention policies were contained within the UK government's national tree strategy when they wanted to massively increase forestry by the magic year of 2030. And you wonder why we've got increasing wildfires. It's not just because of hot spells, it's because of sometimes arson, but also bad forestry policy. So speaking of bad government policy, we have the Environment Secretary here, George Eustace, whose last name I'm not convinced isn't just a misspelling of useless. He says, saving water is not about reducing unnecessary consumption, is about reducing unnecessary consumption, not restricting essential use. I agree. So then he says, the onus must be on water companies to do more to reduce leakage, building on the progress made in recent years. Sorry.
He's going to have a drink to spite him quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to spit to make myself dehydrated. Progress made in recent years? That's interesting. Because if we go to the next article, they've got really bad leaking problems.
Well, yeah, this is known pretty much nationwide that particularly Thames Water, they always have leaks in their pipes.
Yeah. So why are we kissing the backsides of the water companies who have done relatively little to improve the state of leaks over the last 25 years or so?
They've spammed me with loads of text messages is what they've done. I've had about 8 texts from Thames Water telling me how to save water. They're like, don't water your garden. I'm just like, I don't have one.
Yeah. Well, don't you love the massive expansion of HR and social media departments and everything, and we wonder why nothing's working. Daily demand for water in England and Wales was 14 billion litres in 2018, but each day for the last 25 years, another 3 billion litres was lost through leakage, according to a National Audit Office report. We can see the graph here. Thank you very much, Michael. Looking to some of the other bigger suppliers, Thames Water's target was 644.3 million litres of water leaked every day. And it lost 635. United Utilities' target was 443.5 million litres of water, and it lost 438.8 million. Severn Trent's water was 418.2 million, and it lost 414.6. These companies that missed their targets were Northumbrian Water, South West Water, Southern Water, and Affinity Water. Doesn't seem like there's many penalties for that. You're still forced to pay for this because, of course, it is a monopoly, because there's only one set of pipes. And as you can see by the graph, if you're not watching this, you were doing the audio only version from 1996, the golden era of the Blair years, which we all definitely never want to return to. It's basically been a constant, non-innovated level of leakage at about 300 million litres a day, which is what 3,000 million litres a day, which is 3 billion. So why has there been no improvement?
Well, I can imagine, because there are almost certainly materials that exist now that are better to transport water. And this is where you need John Wheatley. Yes. He's the materials expert. There's got to be stuff that's better than the old piping. Some of it's still Victorian, and which is ridiculous. So no wonder it's leaky.
Yeah, well, thank God for the Victorians, because we haven't upgraded our infrastructure since the population massively increased, but I'll presage that for later. So what are the water companies doing instead? Well, Thames Water have decided to tell its users to not take showers. That's wonderful. Let's go to the next one, please. In a message sent to customers, I'm sure you got this text as well, Thames Water told people to squeeze that shower to help avoid the taps running dry across the city. The water firm said showers make up 25% of a household's water use, on average. So shave a few minutes off your shower and save loads of litres. Yeah, go around with stink lines above your head. Fantastic. Lovely for the country. As hosepipe bans are imposed across the country, people are also urged to use a watering can instead of the hosepipe and let the grass go brown where they can. Because God forbid you have a nice-looking garden. But I seem to remember that it was also heating water caused climate change. Because, of course, your boilers are evil. They're on gas, right? So thank God the World Economic Forum came in and said people who have regular cold showers take 29 fewer days off work. Apparently, it's really healthy.
All right.
Yeah, so
I have cold showers.
I couldn't imagine it. It's lower carbon and it's really healthy. Oh, but hang on a minute. Have we memory holed something here? don't cold showers cause heart attacks? I seem to remember that sudden adult death syndrome, which has absolutely no cause in recent times, of course, things like gardening, sport, and cold showers caused heart attacks in the healthy. So why the World Economic Forum telling us to kill ourselves to save the planet? I couldn't imagine them saying such a thing. Must be terrible. I hope there's a medical intervention.
To be fair, I'm still here. I've had a fair few cold showers in my day.
Despite my best efforts. So let's look at the state of British utilities, shall we? Now, I don't particularly like the framing of this from The Independent, because they say how the world gets rich from privatising public services. I don't think privatisation is a problem. It's outsourcing the ownership of the country's utilities to other countries who have no stake in our national well-being. So they list here our railways and energy sector, specifically being owned by Holland, France, Germany, Hong Kong, and Belgium. The gigantic dragon in the room not mentioned is China. There's no mention of China in this, unless you're a CCP apologist and you count Hong Kong as a Chinese constituency. But the interesting thing is China own a lot of our stuff, which we'll go on to in a moment. So just so you know that they're claiming for University of Greenwich research in the next article from the Financial Times that privatised water costs have costed £2.3 billion more per year for consumers. So a University of Greenwich report says that they've calculated the cost of privatisation to each household as over £100 a year. So I would say it's not privatisation, it's inefficient and incompetent privatisation more than anything. The National Audit Office in 2015 said household water bills have risen 40% more than inflation since 1989, the year they were privatised. 3 companies, Anglican, Severn and Yorkshire Waters, have paid out more in dividends than their total pre-tax profits in the past decade. So that's just utterly unsustainable. Actually, some guy said, Dr. Bayliss said this was economically unsustainable. Shock, great minds think alike. So who owns the water? 10 regional water authorities were auctioned off by the state in 1989. Investors paid £7.6 billion for the water and sewerage companies, but the UK government took on the sector's entire £4.9 billion in debt and gave the new private corporations £1.5 billion of public funds. So this isn't privatisation, it's state subsidisation, where they make sure that you're too big to fail and the taxpayers have to foot the bill for the inevitable losses.
This is exactly what me and Harry say, that all of these problems in private markets are created by the government interfering in them.
Yeah, because there's no incentive to operate efficiently. Hence why they haven't fixed any of the leaks and why they can feel happy to take out more in shareholder dividends than their actual taxpayer profit, than their actual pre-tax profits, rather. So I wonder if financial malfeasance is endemic to the sector, because if we go to the next one, it turns out China have bought into Thames Water for £500 million and they've got about 10% stake in them. Why are the Chinese interested in the London water firm?
Well, I can give you many reasons. One, it's a reliable investment, and 2, they have leverage over us. They can just be like, oh, sorry, turned off your water. Bye-bye.
Yeah, it's very fifth-generational warfare, isn't it? So China has made the first of an unexpected flurry of investments into Britain's ailing infrastructure, buying nearly 10% of Thames Water. The estimated $500 million deal follows talks in Beijing this week at the time of writing, with Chancellor George Osborne, who is looking overseas investors to finance massive reconstruction of the UK's infrastructure, with the added benefit of boosting the economy. Didn't really happen, did it? I mean, we've got terrible infrastructure at the moment. It hasn't been expanded. The capacity has stayed stagnant while we've had massive population increase, and still transport's exponentially unaffordable, our energy goes out, etc. But the interesting part of the story is it actually followed, and there's links in the description to this. I didn't pull up the articles on screen, but you can go and read in your own time. This followed Thames Water in 2004 pulling out of the first private water processing plant in China. They were going to fund it, and they said the Chinese legal system is too difficult to navigate. So it seems that they've bought their revenue stream at the source, having been spurned about the fact that they backed out of investment.
Good bit of a pun there as well.
Oh, God, I didn't even intend that. So George Osborne said at the time, "It is a vote of confidence in Britain as a place to do business. This investment is good news for both the British and Chinese economies. This deal, financed by the China Investment Corporation State Investment Fund," fantastic, try saying that when you're drunk, "marks the next phase of China's quest for global economic dominance. It is expected to unleash a series of infrastructure investments in the UK and across Europe, with the high-speed 2 high rail link planned between London and Birmingham thought to be on its wish list." So at this point, it seems like we're basically a Belt and Road constituency. I don't understand why, for example, we couldn't use desalination, considering we're an archipelago surrounded entirely by water. But it turns out that Thames Water opened the first desalination plant in Beckton in 2010, but is currently closed around the same time they were bought.
I think desalination can be quite expensive because when you have as much fresh water falling from the sky as we do, it tends to be cheaper just to dig holes and catch it.
Oh, sure, but in times of shortages, you would have thought, there would have, or at least the technology would have come leaps and bounds in the time to desalinate the water to make it a lot more affordable. But they haven't fixed the leaks, they haven't improved desalination, they aren't willing to fire it up, and they're currently owned by China. Very suspicious. Chinese involvement has also continued in HS2. That's basically a giant, expensive railway project the Tories have kept promising to the north to try and win votes, even though it's cutting journey times by about 4 to 8 minutes sometimes. It's utterly ridiculous. It's a black hole of public funds. So even after COVID, the state-owned firm China Railway Electrification Engineering Group have bid for a £300 million contract to fit cables for the project. But the total cost of the project has ballooned from the time they signed on here, from 32.7 billion to now 98 billion. It just keeps going up, but the promise hasn't waned. So if we look to who got us into this mess, I suppose, I've presaged it. George Osborne has hailed a new golden decade in Sino-British relations. I suppose in opinions that age like milk, this is the one for the day. George Osborne arrived in Beijing on Sunday to proclaim the advent of a golden decade. The main purpose of Mr. Osborne's mission is to persuade China that no economy in the West is as open to Chinese investment as the UK, as witnessed by his offer to China to take a big stake in Britain's nuclear power revival. Definitely not a national security risk there. Again, speaking of takes that age like milk, we see the lay press try and push and propagandize in saying that in the next piece from the Telegraph at the time, most people support this. We've got the charts to prove it. Yeah, so it's very much smacks of the YouGov 71% of people agree that we should sell our entire economy off to China. It's the classic managerial incrementalism. If you can find a study to support it, the Tory party back off their principles and just say, if it keeps me in politics, if it keeps me going to fancy parties, it doesn't matter how we do it or when we do it, it just matters that we do it. Well, always ask about the morality beneath policy, please, but this has just not come into consideration. I'm glad the lexicon at least is more critical these days of minerals coming from China, etc. The slave labor taken to make solar panels. However, we still have Chinese investment in our nuclear power plants. So we've got water shortages, partially caused by Chinese half-owned companies, or part-owned, I should say. But also our nuclear power stations seem to be quite a crucial piece of our energy infrastructure. And unfortunately, as I reported quite a while ago, Chinese General Nuclear owns a 33% stake in Hinkley Point C, currently being constructed, a 22% stake in Sizewell C, and shares in the future Bradwell B1 and B2 nuclear plants. Our government has also pledged $50 million to co-fund a cutting-edge Chinese General Nuclear Research Centre housed here in the UK.
That's not worrying at all.
No. It should be worrying because in 2016, Nick Timothy advised then Prime Minister Theresa May that China could use their role to build weaknesses into computer systems which will allow them to shut down Britain's energy production at will. So, to Americans who were worried when on day one Joe Biden repealed that executive order that Trump passed to stop Chinese transformers from being used in your energy grid system because they could have done a smart grid and then turned it off remotely and left America entirely vulnerable to blackouts, we're doing it worse. Turns out, because these things can't even be easily replaced. We've just got giant computer-operated nuclear reactors at the behest of China. So basically got domesticated nuclear meltdowns waiting to happen. I love that. Absolutely fantastic. We should expand nuclear capacity, but we've got to stop buying from these idiots. So just on the last point, the artificial demand is absolutely being driven by population density as well. Because shockingly, and Tom Holland told this story at a Conservative Environment Network conference that I attended, and he was actually the most conservative person there. He was quoting Scruton, despite a bunch of other conservative politicians being very tepid. And one guy actually, and you'd hate this as someone who hates MMT like I do, one guy who is an economist at Oxford University, when I asked him why aren't you using tax cuts to fund anything environmental, he said, well, tax cuts are a form of redistribution. Because he believes the government progenites the economy, and if you put taxes back into the system, you're going to worsen inflation.
How can you call yourself an economist, let alone teach at Oxford?
Yeah, I think you should just be called a saboteur. But if we look at the statistics from the Office of National Statistics here, it turns out that population density migration has doubled births in recent years. So the native British population is a rate of knots, not replacing itself, not conferring the same values onto itself, but also migration where people live in ethnic enclaves, essentially. They want to live in little cultural satellite states. In certain places, like London specifically, and this is where Tom Holland's story comes in, I got slightly derailed, loads of water has to be diverted there from the neighbouring towns. And so Tom Holland's town in, I believe it said Stratford, he had a little river. It's historic. The Romans have written about it, goes back years. It's completely dry now, entirely dry, because since the Victorian times, the sewage capacity, the infrastructure hasn't been properly upgraded in London. And so because we're still using the old pipes for a massively higher population, we're having to drain all the resources from neighbouring places. And it's no wonder the reservoirs are running dry, no wonder nothing works, no wonder that we're being faced with punitive nanny state measures like hosepipe bans and rationing our heat of our water, when it's just the water companies have fallen down on the job. And it's either that it's a fifth generational warfare tactic by China, or just mass migration policies seem to be worsening all the shortages that we've experienced. Is there much chance of an alleviation of at least the inflated demand here, do you reckon?
I don't think so. I think there's certainly a chance of an increase in supply, judging from looking out the window.
Yes. Imminent British weather seems to solve all our problems. Unfortunately, the imminent British Prime Minister is not going to. If we can just play from where I sent you, Michael.
Final yes or no, cap on immigration?
No. I think we should have the skills we need in our country, but I don't believe in an arbitrary target. And when we had one before, it didn't work.
Oh, it didn't work because you didn't enforce it. If you had an arbitrary target, as you so call it, a cap on immigration, rather than having a skills-based system, rather than allowing untold numbers of people, 1 million people last year to come in, it might do something to just, alleviate pressure from our ridiculously underfunded at the rate of use for people that don't fund them public services. I mean, the NHS keeps going up endlessly, but it's because people never pay into it. So I've got a couple of solutions, and I'll just run them by you to wrap up. Ban on foreign ownership of British property and utilities. If you don't have a citizenship here, you don't get to pay it.
I think countries that are potential political enemies or explicit political enemies, absolutely not. But as I said before we started recording this, if someone is, say, like Iceland wanted to own part of Thames Water, I don't think they're going to go out of their way to try and go to war with us.
I think you're going to see our allies have their systems exploited with things like shell companies, and they're just going to be bought up by those kind of billionaires anyway. So I just think flat out ban at that point. Hard moratorium on immigration, illegal and legal alike.
Yep.
And anti-lockdown level media pressure, by the likes of us, of course, against climate change policies which are designed to impoverish us. I think we need some sort of referendum or say on net zero, and things like this clearly are just making the situation worse. If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go over to lotuseaters.com to subscribe to become a premium member on our website, where you'll get lots of exclusive content, like this epochs from Bo and Josh on the Allied's operation in the film A Bridge Too Far. If you'd like to see the rest of the content we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.